Welcome to another deep dive with us. Today we're looking into language and how it works, like a system.
Oh yeah, like a system of signs.
Exactly. So we're diving into some audio lectures called Signs, Mind, and Reality. If you had a chance to listen to these.
Yeah, they're amazing. Really get into how language is kind of like a code, right? With all these hidden meanings.
Yeah, and we're going to try to uncover those hidden meanings, see how it all connects to the way we think.
I think a lot of people take language for granted. I mean, it seems so basic, but when you really start digging in,
Oh, yeah.
there's so much complexity there. The lectures actually start with what's called the linguistic sign. It's basically the building block of language.
Okay, so like the atom of language.
Kind of, yeah. But it's not just about, defining what a sign is. It's about how all these signs work together
Right.
to actually create meaning.
So like how they interact, how they combine.
Exactly. And sometimes even how they change roles in a sentence.
Oh, that's interesting. So how do they explain that?
Well, there's this great analogy in the lectures about how a linguistic sign is like an actor.
Like an actor playing different roles.
Yes, exactly. It's like, Laurence Olivier playing Hamlet.
Okay, I see where you're going with this.
Olivier is still himself, right?
Right.
But he's also embodying this completely different character.
Yeah,
And it's the same with words. The word itself stays the same,
right.
but it can function in different ways depending on the role it's playing in the sentence.
So like the same word could be a noun or a verb depending on how it's used.
Exactly. Like think about the word run. Its primary function is as a verb, like I run every morning. But you can also say, let's go for a run, and then it's a noun.
Right, right. So it's the same word, but it's doing different things.
Yes. And the word itself is like the actor, and the different ways it functions in a sentence are like the different roles it plays.
I like that. It's a cool way to picture it.
Right. It's a really helpful analogy. And it all connects to the idea of language as a system. That's where this concept of superposition comes in.
Superposition. That sounds kind of complicated.
It sounds like physics, doesn't it? But it's actually pretty simple. It just means that signs can combine and overlap to create new meanings.
So like they build on top of each other.
Yeah, exactly, like layers.
Okay.
One example they give in the lectures uses the passive voice. The sentence is, Boris was deceived by Peter. So normally the phrase by Peter functions as what we call an oblique construction.
Oblique construction.
But in this case, it also takes on the role of the subject.
Ah, because Peter's the one doing the deceiving.
Yes, exactly. So there's this superposition of functions happening.
That is pretty cool. It's like those word puzzles, where you rearrange the letters to make different words.
Yeah, I love those.
Like the same pieces can be combined in different ways to create new meaning.
Got it. And this idea of superposition actually helps explain how language can be both stable and flexible at the same time.
Wait, so how does that work? It seems like if meanings can just change all the time, things would get really confusing.
Well, language has systems in place to manage that flexibility.
Like what?
Well, one example is the relationship between polysemy and synonymy.
Okay, break those down for me.
Polysemy just means a word can have multiple meanings. Like, think of the word snake. It can refer to the actual animal,
Right.
but it can also be used as a metaphor, like, he's such a snake.
Okay, yeah.
And then synonymy is where words have similar meanings, so like happy and joyful.
Yeah, okay.
So even though a word might have multiple meanings,
Right.
the context and the surrounding words usually help us figure out which meaning is intended.
So like a backup system.
Yeah, exactly. Synonymy acts as a kind of constraint on polysemy.
Okay.
It makes sure that communication stays clear even when words have all these different potential meanings.
I never thought about it that way, but it makes sense.
Right. So it's just one example of how language balances stability and flexibility.
Which I guess is important for both understanding and expression, right?
Absolutely. Now, this balance gets even more interesting when we look at word classes like nouns, verbs, adjectives, the basic building blocks of sentences.
Oh, yeah, GERD classes.
Yeah.
Those are familiar. We all learned those in school.
Yeah.
But I bet these lectures go way beyond the basics, right?
Oh, definitely. They get into some really fascinating stuff. Like, there's this idea called the law of contentive autonomous word classes.
Okay, that's a mouthful.
I know, right? But it basically means that each word class has a primary function in a sentence.
Okay.
So nouns act as subjects, verbs as predicates, adjectives as attributes, and so on.
So there's like a natural logic to how these word classes work together.
Exactly. But of course, language isn't never that simple. The lectures also talk about the work of Edward Sapir.
Okay, Sapir, yeah. He was a linguist, right?
Yeah, and he kind of challenged this idea of fixed word classes.
Oh, how so?
Well, he observed that the same word can function differently across languages. Like, for example, red can act like a verb in the sentence, it reddens.
Hmm.
So he noticed this kind of fluidity and concluded that word classes were maybe a bit arbitrary.
Arbitrary. Like random.
Well, not exactly random, but more a reflection of our habits of thought than any inherent structure in language.
Oh, interesting. So like different languages just categorize things differently based on how their speakers think about the world.
Yeah, kind of. But the lectures actually offer a different perspective on this. To get to that, though, let's shift gears a bit and talk about the world of sound. The lectures also explore the concept of the phoneme.
Phones. Those are the units of sound that make up words, right? Like the B and the P in bat and
Yeah.
pat.
Exactly. They're what let us distinguish between different words.
So where do phonemes fit into all of this whole picture of language as a system?
Well, that's where the idea of vocal relativity comes in. Different languages actually categorize sounds in different ways.
Oh, really?
Yeah, for example, in English, the sounds P, T, and K are distinct phonemes,
Right.
but in some languages, they might have aspirated versions of those sounds, like PH, TH, A as separate phonemes.
Wow. So what we hear as just one sound in English could be multiple different sounds in another language.
Exactly. Isn't that cool?
It's mind-blowing.
It really shows how the language we speak shapes our perception of sound.
Totally. It's
Yeah.
like what you said earlier about language being a code.
Yeah,
We're not just hearing the sound itself, we're hearing the meaning behind it.
precisely. And just like those linguistic signs we were talking about, phones also have this kind of duality.
Duality.
Yeah, the lectures describe the phone as a unity of opposites. Its functional role, what they call its distinctive feature, and its physical realization, which is the actual sound.
Okay, I'm trying to follow. So the phone has this like double identity. It's defined both by its function in the language and the sound it makes.
You got it. And to make this even clearer, they use this analogy from economics.
Economics.
Yeah, they compare phonemes to commodities.
Okay.
Like, think about it. The value of a commodity doesn't come from the physical object itself, but from its ability to be exchanged. And it's the same with phones. Their value comes from their ability to be exchanged for meaning within the system of language.
Oh, I see. So the value of a phone lies in its ability to differentiate words and create meaning.
Precisely. And the crazy part is that this value can stay the same even when the physical sound changes.
Really?
Yeah, they give this fascinating example from Danish. The openness of vowels changes before the sound R.
Interesting.
But the phonemes themselves maintain their functional role. So even though the sound changes, the meaning stays consistent.
So it's like the phone is adapting to its surroundings, but its core identity stays the same.
Exactly. That's a great way to put it.
Wow, this is already getting pretty deep.
Yeah.
We've covered actors, puzzles, secret codes, commodities, all to understand how language works.
And we're just scratching the surface. These lectures really show how intricate and fascinating language is. There's always more to discover.
That's amazing.
It is, isn't it?
Well, I, for one, am definitely hooked. Can't wait to dive into the next part and see where this takes us.
Me too. This is just the beginning.
You know, it's really interesting how these lectures challenge the way we normally think about language. Like, instead of getting caught up in individual sounds or meanings, they encourage us to look at how those pieces function within the whole system.
Right. It's about seeing the bigger picture.
Yeah, like if you're trying to understand how a car works, you wouldn't just study each part in isolation.
Exactly. You need to see how all those parts fit together to make the car move.
And these lectures use this concept of value-changing context to illustrate that point. They argue that different pieces of information in a sentence aren't really different meanings, but variations of the same core meaning shaped by the context.
It's a subtle but really important distinction.
Okay, I think I need an example to really grasp this.
Sure, so think about the sentence, the water spilled. Now consider these variations. John spilled the water. The water spilled on the floor. Yesterday, the water spilled. The meaning of spill itself doesn't change in those sentences.
Right, it's still the same action.
Exactly. What changes is the information surrounding that action. Who spilled it, where it spilled, when it happened.
Ah, I see. So the core meaning stays the same, but the context adds layers of information. It's like the word itself is a building block,
Yeah, like a Lego.
and the context determines how that block fits into the overall structure.
You got it. And this idea of meaning changing versus information changing context also applies to sounds.
Oh, really? How so?
Well, the lectures talk about phoneme changing contexts and sound changing contexts where the function of a sound can change based on the surrounding sounds. Remember, the phoneme is that basic unit of sound that distinguishes words.
Right, so even though a sound might stay the same physically, its role in the language can shift.
Precisely. It really emphasizes how everything is interconnected within the system of language.
It's like a giant web where every strand is connected to every other strand.
That's a great way to put it. And that's where the lectures offer a really interesting critique of traditional linguistics.
What do they say?
Well, they point out that traditional approaches often get lost in all these variations of meanings and sounds,
Okay.
without seeing the stable, unchanging principles that underlie them.
So like they're focusing on the individual trees instead of the whole forest.
Exactly. They're not seeing the underlying patterns, the fundamental rules of the game.
So these lectures are encouraging us to look for those average patterns, the laws that govern how all these signs interact.
You got it. And that brings us back to the principle of superposition, which they actually extend to diachrony.
Diachrony.
It's the study of how language changes over time.
Oh, wow. So not just how language works now, but how it's evolved over centuries.
Exactly. And the lectures argue that superposition is the key to how signs differentiate and create new meanings over time.
Interesting. So how does that play out in the history of language?
Well, they give an example from the Romance languages like Spanish, French, Italian.
Go.
Apparently, the perfect tense in those languages developed from a structure that was originally a verbal adjective.
A verbal adjective.
Yeah, so over time, through superposition, it took on the function of the simple past tense, while the original verbal adjective took on a different secondary function.
So it's like this constant linguistic dance, sounds and meanings, switching partners, creating new combinations over time.
I love that analogy. And speaking of partners, the lectures also dive into the concept of synonymy.
Synonymy, okay.
They argue that it's crucial to understanding superposition. They propose that synonymy isn't really about two words having the exact same meaning,
Right.
but rather about their meanings being equivalent in a specific context.
So it's more like two sides of the same coin. They're different but connected by this shared essence.
That's a beautiful way to put it. And they say this view of synonymy helps explain how language can be both stable and flexible.
So it allows for nuance and creativity.
Exactly. While still maintaining clear communication.
It's incredible how all these concepts are connected. Superposition, synonymy, word classes, phonemes. It's like this giant tapestry.
It is. And the lectures also take the time to critique other schools of thought, like Noam Chomsky's generative grammar.
Chomsky, yeah, he's kind of a big name in linguistics.
He is. But the lectures argue that these formal models, while useful, can't fully capture the dynamic and constantly evolving nature of language.
So language is more than just a set of rules. It's a living, breathing system.
Exactly. And they even use this funny analogy. They compare formalist linguists to a drunk man searching for his keys under a streetlight.
Under a streetlight.
Yeah. Not because he lost them there, but because the light is better. It's a way of saying that focusing on what's easily measurable can distract us from the bigger picture.
I love that. It's like the saying, if all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail.
Right. We need to use different tools and perspectives to understand something as complex as language.
Totally. And speaking of different perspectives, the lectures also contrast their view with the theory of glossomatics.
Glossomatics, okay.
It was developed by Louis Helmsleb. He believed that language is a purely relational system.
Meaning that the meaning of an element depends entirely on its relationship to other elements.
So like saying a word only has meaning in relation to other words.
Yeah, that's the basic idea. But the lectures push back on this.
How so?
They argue that it's too abstract, that it ignores the real-world material aspects of language.
So it's like saying a friendship can't exist without the friends. You need both the relationships and the things being related.
Exactly. We need to consider both the materiality of signs, the sounds and symbols,
Right.
and the relational structures that give them meaning. It's a both-hands situation.
This is really making me rethink everything I thought I knew about language. It's so much more complex and nuanced than I ever realized.
It is, isn't it? And these lectures are doing such a great job of unpacking all that complexity.
Absolutely. They're challenging our assumptions about grammar and linguistics, and it's incredibly exciting.
I know, right? It's like a whole new world is opening up.
It is, and I can't wait to see where they take us next.
Me neither. There's still so much more to explore.
Okay, so now we're getting to the word. That seems like a pretty basic concept, right? Like, we all know what a word is.
You'd think so, wouldn't you? But it turns out defining a word is actually a huge challenge for linguists.
Really? Why is that?
Well, it's harder than it looks. How do you define it? Is it just a bunch of sounds strung together? What about different forms of the same word? Like run, runs, running.
Right, are those all separate words?
Exactly. It gets tricky. Some linguists have even given up on the concept altogether because it's so hard to pin down.
Wow. Okay, so how do these lectures approach it?
They define a word as the smallest unit of language that can function on its own in a sentence.
So it's not just about the word itself, but how it works with other words.
Yeah, it's all about how words combine to create bigger chunks of meaning.
So the context matters.
Absolutely. And that leads to a distinction between a word and a lexeme.
Okay, another term, what's a lexeme?
Basically, it's all the different forms a word can take. So run, runs, running, those are all forms of the lexeme run.
Ah, okay. So the lexeme is like the underlying concept.
Yeah,
And the different word forms are just variations on that theme.
exactly. The lexeme is what stays the same, the invariant.
And the word forms are the variants.
Precisely.
So where does all this fit in with those bigger ideas we've been talking about, like superposition and the structure of language?
Well, from there, the lectures talk about different types of words, autonomous and non-autonomous.
Okay, break that down for me.
Autonomous words can stand on their own, like nouns, verbs, adjectives.
The heavy hitter?
Yeah. And then non-autonomous words need to be attached to other words to make sense, like prepositions, conjunctions.
Okay, so like the glue that holds everything together.
Exactly. And this distinction is actually super important for understanding how word classes work, parts of speech.
Like nouns, verbs, and all that.
Yeah. The lectures argue that it's not just about the meaning of a word, but its function in the sentence.
This reminds me of what we were saying about Edward Sapir earlier.
Oh, yeah, with read being a verb in some languages.
Yeah. He thought word classes were kind of arbitrary.
Right, but these lectures offer a different perspective.
What do they say?
They say that Sapir missed something crucial: the hierarchy of syntactic functions.
Okay, big words. What does that mean?
It means there's a logic to how word classes work, a sort of natural order,
Okay.
and they call it the law of contentive autonomous word classes.
Another mouthful.
It basically says that each word class has a primary function.
Oh, I see.
So nouns are mainly subjects, verbs are mainly predicates, and so on.
So there is a system, but it's not rigid.
Right. And that's where superposition comes back in.
Of course. Always superposition.
A word can have secondary functions, but its primary function is what determines its class.
So like we're different hats.
But then it always has a home base.
Makes sense. And this idea of primary and secondary functions, it applies to more than just words, right?
Exactly. Remember how we were talking about phones having a functional role and a physical realization?
Yeah, like the sound versus its meaning.
Exactly. So it's the same principle at work, just at a different level of language.
It's all connected.
It is. Superposition is everywhere.
Wow. It's really the key to understanding how language is structured.
The lectures definitely make that case.
And then they take it even further, right? With this idea of maximal distinction.
Oh, yeah, that's a good one. It basically means that a word's function is determined by where it's most different from other related words.
So each word is trying to stand out, to find its own unique place.
Yeah, it's like they're all competing for attention, trying to be heard.
That's a cool way to think about it.
And this principle actually helps us understand how different languages are structured, language typology.
Like how some languages are more verb-heavy or noun-heavy.
Exactly. And it all comes down to the distinction between dependent and independent words.
Those autonomous and non-autonomous words we talked about.
Yes. That basic distinction shapes how whole languages are organized.
Wow. We're going from tiny sounds to whole languages.
Right. It's all part of the same system. And this brings us to a really big idea: the relationship between language and thought.
Okay, that's a big one. What do the lectures say?
They argue that thought is the substance of language, and language is the form of thought.
So thought is like the raw material, and language is what we use to shape it.
Precisely. And while thought needs language to be expressed, it's not limited by any one language.
So the same thought can be expressed in many different ways.
Exactly. Across languages, even within the same language.
It's like language is this amazing tool that lets us share our thoughts with the world.
It is. And these lectures have given us a whole new way of understanding how that tool works.
This deep dive has been incredible. We've gone from the tiniest sounds to the biggest ideas about language and thought.
It's been a wild ride, but I think we've learned a lot.
I know I have. I feel like I have a whole new appreciation for the power and complexity of language.
Me too. It really makes you realize how much we take it for granted.
Absolutely. And I'm sure our listeners are feeling the same way. So much to think about.
Yeah, it's definitely sparked some new ideas for me.
Me too. Who knows what other linguistic adventures are out there waiting to be discovered?
The possibilities are endless.
That's the beauty of it, right?
Yeah.
There's always more to learn, always more to explore. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive. It's been a pleasure.
The pleasure was all mine. Until next time.